Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me alright over the sound of all this rain. I'm currently sitting in my back garden under the shelter of an umbrella as it's absolutely pouring down with rain. I had thought about possibly going out and doing something slightly different today, but the weather has put paid to that, unfortunately. So I've decided instead to come out here into the garden and to try and take some photos, some macro style photos, using a couple of different methods. The first method, of course, is simply using the camera. This is the Canon EOS 600D with an 18 to 55mm lens on it, and what I intend to do is try and shoot some macro style photos with this setup. I'm also going to try and use this macro extension tube, and it's basically a set of tubes which all screw together and unscrew, and you have, on the one end you have a lens mount, and on the other you have a connection to the lens mount as it is. So you have a camera with the lens on, or I can then put that on there and then put the lens on the front of this adapter. First of all though, I'm going to try and use this setup, the Canon EOS 600D with an 18 to 55mm lens. I'll see what I can get with that. It does mean that I'm going to have to run around the garden a little bit in the rain, so I'm probably going to get a little bit wet, but it shouldn't take me too long to complete this one. I am deliberately choosing to handhold with this setup, purely and simply because it's a lot easier to get in nice and close to the subject. I'm finding a lot of flowers and leaves with water droplets on them because of the rain, and what I'm trying to do is ensure that I can get close enough to get a decent macro shot with an 18 to 55mm lens. It's not particularly easy, but I am able to do it, and I'm shooting with the widest possible aperture, so I get a very shallow depth of field, but also with an ISO of 400, and I'm shooting with aperture priority set on the camera instead of manual mode, and the reason for that is I just want to keep the aperture permanent. I want to stick with that widest possible aperture I can get, so that means I'm going to shoot at aperture priority to make sure that happens. I've taken a couple of shots. I'm going to have another look around and see if there's another couple of things that I can take, and I'll let you know what I'm doing. So after taking a couple of shots, what I decided was to switch out my lens to the 70 to 300mm. That's the Tamron lens, and basically because it's got the 70 to 300mm zoom on it, I can use that also as a macro lens. It's not a proper macro, but it does have a macro switch on the side of it, just there. Just there. That's a macro switch, and it allows me to switch from the normal mode to a macro mode, which means I can get in slightly closer and capture some slightly better images, macro style images, with this lens. The rain is on and off at the moment, so I might just be able to get some decent shots while I'm out here, but the good news is that if it does really get very heavy, I can just rush back inside into the house because I'm in my own back garden. So I've got a few shots there. I hope you're enjoying them for now. The rain is starting to get a little bit heavier again, so I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to stay out here. So what I'd like to do now is switch over to the extension tube that I talked about earlier, and I think I'm going to just use the 18 to 55mm lens on there. I may even decide to get out the 50mm lens. That of course has got a much wider aperture of f1.8, which means that I can get a much shallower depth of field with that, and that could be an interesting one as well, and that'll make for some nice macro style shots. Again, it's not a proper macro lens, however it can be used in that way. So it would appear as though the rain has stopped for now, but it'll probably start up again fairly soon. I've taken a few shots with the 18 to 55mm lens and the macro extension tubes fitted as well. Unfortunately, what I'm finding is that with the macro extension tubes I have to get in extremely close to my subject to try and get anything really interesting, and then when I do that it's very difficult to stand still whilst hand holding and keep everything in focus. I did just about manage to switch the camera to manual mode, and I was able to change the shutter speed once I'd got there and the ISO, so it was possible to alter the exposure by using those two methods. Now I'm going to try using the 50mm lens to see if that makes any difference, and we may get some interesting images with that. Just out of interest also, there's a party going on up the road, and seems to be quite a lot of music coming from the back garden, which is interesting because it's been pouring with rain all afternoon, but let them carry on, they're enjoying themselves. So that'll be the music that you can hear in the background if you can hear it. So now I'm going to switch to the 50mm lens and see what happens. So the 50mm wasn't really working very well. It's probably designed more for a portrait style shot, just like the 18 to 55mm lens. The 70 to 300mm lens was slightly better because obviously I can focus at 300mm or at 70mm, whichever I choose, and anywhere in between. But what I found with the 70 to 300mm lens was that although it's kind of got a bit of a macro end to it, it's not really a macro style, it's not really a proper macro lens. So although I can get some decent macro images with it, it's not what you'd expect really. But also what I found with it was that it's got a very large minimum focus distance, which means that when you're trying to take a photo of a subject, you have to be quite a long distance away from the subject and then zoom in using the zoom to try and capture an image of it. This is kind of making things a bit difficult for me really, because it means that whereas I might be standing right next to a subject that I want to capture, I'll have to step back 3 or 4 steps, probably about 4 feet away from the subject before I can even get any kind of focus on it with the 70 to 300mm lens. So although that's okay, it wasn't really the best option. Also, what I found with the macro extension tubes was that they were probably the best option to use. The other problem with the macro extension tubes, what I've found is these are very cheap macro extension tubes, and I can't even remember where I bought them or how much I paid for them, but they were extremely cheap, and they've got a bit of a problem with them in that I can't now get my 18 to 55mm lens off that extension tube, that macro extension tube. There's a little pin here which is supposed to come out, and I'm able then to twist the lens off, but I can't get the pin to move, so I don't know whether I'll be able to get that lens off from now on, which could hamper my progress in the future. But never mind, I'll see if I can give that another try when I get back in the house. All of that was obviously the budget option for shooting macro style images. Obviously if I wanted to shoot proper macro images, I would have to buy myself a proper macro lens, which are extremely expensive. I currently don't have £1,500 that I can spare to pay for a macro lens, so with all of these other options that I had, I thought, why not give this a try and see if I can capture something, and if this works then I'll carry on with this. But obviously there's a number of issues, so it may be that I have to invest in a macro lens at some point in the future. Anyway, if you've enjoyed watching me make an absolute fool of myself with all this kit, and not really capture any macros, but just macro style images that don't really count as proper macros, then please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on another video very shortly. Bye for now.